I'm Mackenzie Reynolds, 26 years old, and family gatherings have always been complicated for me. But nothing prepared me for when my parents said I wasn't ready to sit with the family at Thanksgiving this year. The word stung like ice against warm skin. Their suggestion that I skip our family gathering entirely left me confused and heartbroken. Something bigger was happening beneath the surface of our picture-perfect family, and I was about to find out what. So I stayed home and, well, that decision changed everything. Before I continue my story, where are you watching from? Hit subscribe and like if you've ever felt like the family outsider. This journey of healing and self-discovery might just change your perspective too. Growing up in Westlake, Connecticut, the Reynolds family appeared picture-perfect to outsiders. My father Thomas, a successful investment banker, and my mother Eleanor, a former pediatrician turned community board chairwoman, created a life straight out of a magazine spread. Our colonial-style home with its manicured lawn and tasteful holiday decorations was the backdrop for what everyone assumed was domestic bliss. But appearances can be deceiving. From an early age, the expectations in our household were crystal clear. Excellence wasn't celebrated, it was expected. My older sister Harper excelled at everything she touched. By age 29, she had completed medical school at Johns Hopkins and was beginning her residency in cardiology. My younger brother Ethan, despite being only 24, had graduated early from Yale and secured a position at a prestigious law firm in Boston. Both of them seemed to absorb our parents' ambitions effortlessly, like they were born for success. And then there was me. School never came easily to me the way it did for my siblings. While they breezed through advanced placement courses, I struggled with undiagnosed ADHD that wasn't discovered until my sophomore year of college. My parents viewed my academic challenges as a lack of focus or, worse, laziness. If you just applied yourself like Harper, my mother would say, her disappointment barely concealed behind a tight smile. Our family had traditions that inadvertently highlighted these differences. Every Sunday dinner included achievement announcements, where we would take turns sharing our weekly accomplishments. Harper's medical school acceptances and Ethan's debate championship trophies were met with champagne toasts and proud speeches. My achievements in art and creative writing were acknowledged with polite nods and quick subject changes. That's nice, Mackenzie. Did everyone hear about Harper's research paper being published? When I was 16, I won a regional photography contest. My black and white portrait series captured the weathered faces of local fishermen, telling their stories through carefully composed shots. The local paper featured my work, and for once, I thought my parents might see my value. But at dinner that night, after a cursory congratulations, the conversation pivoted to Ethan's perfect SAT scores for 15 minutes. I excused myself early, my uneaten dessert a silent testament to my disappointment. Failures were rarely discussed in our household. When Harper didn't get into her first-choice medical school, it was mentioned once and never again. When Ethan lost a mock trial competition, the subject was immediately changed. But my setbacks became topics of concern, discussed at length as evidence of a troubling pattern. Family gatherings amplified these dynamics tenfold. My Aunt Vivian, my mother's younger sister, often played the role of family mediator. She was the only one who seemed to notice the pattern of how I was treated differently. Mackenzie has such a creative mind, she would interject when conversations about my future became uncomfortable. Not everyone is meant to follow the same path. My father's brother, Uncle Robert, was even more successful than my dad, having founded a technology company that went public in the early 2000s. His presence at family events created an added layer of pressure, as my cousins joined the chorus of achievement that seemed to highlight my inadequacies. My grandparents, Margaret and William Reynolds, were kind but traditional. They came from old money and believed in legacy and reputation above all else. My grandmother once pulled me aside at a Christmas gathering when I was 20 to tell me, "It's still not too late to switch to a practical major, dear." I was studying communications with a focus on digital media, apparently not practical enough for the Reynolds family standard. As I got older, my anxiety at family gatherings intensified. What started as a nervous stomach before dinner parties evolved into full-blown panic attacks by my early 20s. I would hide in bathrooms, trying to control my breathing while tears streamed silently down my face. No one ever noticed when I returned to the table with slightly reddened eyes. Or if they did, no one mentioned it. After college, I defied expectations by moving to New York instead of Boston or New Haven, where most Reynolds traditionally settled. I secured a position at a digital marketing firm that specialized in nonprofit clients, a job that made me genuinely happy despite its modest salary. For 3 years, I built a life that felt authentic. My tiny apartment in Brooklyn became my sanctuary, decorated with thrift store finds and my own photography. I made friends who valued my creativity and perspective. I even started dating James Mitchell, a graphic designer whose kindness and understanding helped heal some of my oldest insecurities. Then last spring, disaster struck. The marketing firm lost its biggest client, and layoffs were announced. Being one of the newer team members, I was among the first let go. The shame of unemployment hit me hard, especially knowing how my family would perceive it. With my savings dwindling and New York rents skyrocketing, I made the difficult decision to move back to Westlake temporarily. Returning home at 26 felt like the ultimate failure. My parents offered their guest house until I got back on my feet, but their help came wrapped in judgment. "If you had chosen a more stable industry," my father remarked while helping carry my boxes, "you wouldn't be in this position." In the months that followed, the distance between my family and me grew from a gap to a chasm. While I applied for jobs and picked up freelance work, I could feel their disappointment radiating through the walls. Weekly family dinners became exercises in endurance, with questions about my job search feeling more like interrogations. The subtle comparisons to Harper and Ethan's stability were constant and corrosive. By fall, I had established a modest client base for freelance social media management, enough to begin planning my escape back to independence. But I wasn't moving fast enough for my parents, who began making comments about motivation and direction with increasing frequency. What I didn't realize then was that my apparent lack of progress was becoming a topic of discussion beyond our immediate family circle, a conversation that would ultimately lead to the most painful exclusion of my life. The annual Reynolds Thanksgiving gathering was a cornerstone of our family tradition. Each year, relatives from across the Northeast would descend on my grandparents' sprawling colonial home in Westlake for a weekend of carefully orchestrated festivities. The invitation usually arrived by mid-October, a cream-colored card with copper foil lettering, formal despite being sent to family. My grandmother insisted on maintaining certain standards. When this year's invitation arrived in the mail, addressed to Miss Mackenzie Reynolds and guest, I felt a flutter of hope. Perhaps this Thanksgiving could be different. Maybe I could bring James, introducing him to my family as a symbol of the life I was rebuilding. I imagined sharing my recent freelance successes, proving that I was finding my way, albeit on a different path than expected. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to feel excited about a family gathering. I called James immediately, and he agreed to accompany me, understanding the significance behind the simple invitation. "I'll be right beside you the whole time," he promised, his voice a comfort through the phone. 3 days later, my mother called. Her tone was measured in that particular way that always signaled difficult news. "Mackenzie, dear, I wanted to talk to you about Thanksgiving." "I was just about to RSVP," I said cheerfully. "James and I are looking forward to it." A pause stretched between us, heavy with unspoken tension. "About that," my mother continued. "Your father and I have been discussing it, and we think perhaps this year might not be the best time for you to join the family gathering." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sank onto my bed, my free hand clutching at the quilt. "What do you mean?" "The invitation came yesterday." "I know, and that was my mother's doing. She sends them all out at once." Another pause. "We just don't think you're ready, given everything that's been going on." "Ready?" "Mom, it's Thanksgiving dinner, not a marathon." "What exactly am I not ready for?" My mother sighed, that familiar sound of disappointment I'd grown to dread. "There are going to be some difficult conversations this year. Family tensions you don't need to deal with right now. We're trying to protect you, really." Protect me from what? I'm 26 years old, not a child. It's complicated, Mackenzie. There are family matters being discussed that might be upsetting, given your current situation. The vagueness was infuriating. My current situation? You mean being temporarily unemployed after a company layoff? Having to move back home? Taking time to find the right next step instead of jumping into something I'll hate. Please don't get emotional, my mother said, her voice cooling several degrees. This is precisely what we're trying to avoid. The holidays are stressful enough without adding unnecessary drama. So I'm drama now? The hurt was transforming into anger, my voice rising despite my effort to control it. Is everyone else still invited? Harper and Ethan? Another telling silence. I see, I said, my voice now barely audible. Just me, then. Your father agrees this is for the best, she added, as if his endorsement settled the matter completely. You can come for Christmas, of course, once things have stabilized. After hanging up, I sat motionless for nearly 20 minutes, the phone still clutched in my hand. The rejection was so absolute, so public, everyone would know I'd been excluded. The shame burned through me like acid. Later that evening, my father called. I let it go to voicemail, unable to face another conversation filled with vague justifications. His message was brief and uncomfortable. Your mother told me about your conversation. We think this is the right decision for everyone involved. Take some time to focus on your job search. We can reevaluate for Christmas. Focus on my job search. As if missing Thanksgiving would somehow improve my employment prospects. The subtext was clear: fix yourself, then you can rejoin the family. I didn't respond to his message. The following day, my sister Harper called. Unlike our parents, she at least had the decency to sound genuinely conflicted. This is ridiculous, she said after I answered. I told them I thought it was a terrible idea. But not terrible enough for you to skip dinner in solidarity? I couldn't help the bitterness that crept into my voice. Harper sighed. It's not that simple, Mac. There's stuff happening with Grandma and Grandpa's estate planning. Dad doesn't want you there while they're discussing it. What does their estate have to do with me? I probably shouldn't say anything else, she backtracked quickly. Just know I fought for you, but you know how Mom and Dad are once they've made up their minds. Yes, I did know. Their decisions were as immovable as mountains once established. What I couldn't understand was why this particular mountain needed to exist at all. My brother Ethan texted rather than called, "This sucks. Want me to smuggle you some turkey?" His attempt at humor fell flat. I didn't respond. As word spread through the family grapevine, I received an awkward call from Aunt Vivian. I've told your mother she's making a mistake, she said firmly. Family gatherings should include the entire family, period. Her support, while appreciated, only underscored the reality: everyone knew I had been deemed not ready to sit at the family table. Whatever their justifications, the message was clear: I was the problem. The defective Reynolds who couldn't handle adult conversations. The emotional liability who might disrupt the perfect family facade. The day after my mother's call, I formally declined the invitation with a brief email to my grandmother. I couldn't bear to call her directly and hear the mixture of disappointment and relief in her voice. My message was polite but distant: unfortunately, I won't be able to attend Thanksgiving this year. I hope everyone enjoys the gathering. No explanation, no emotion. Just absence. The physical symptoms of rejection manifested almost immediately. Sleep became elusive, my nights spent staring at the ceiling, replaying family conversations and searching for clues about what family matters were so sensitive that I couldn't be trusted to hear them. My appetite vanished. Even James's reassurances couldn't ease the knot of hurt lodged permanently in my chest. You could spend Thanksgiving with my family, he offered gently during one of our phone calls. My mom already asked if you might want to join us. The kindness of his family, people who barely knew me, compared to the rejection from my own blood, made the contrast even more painful. Thank you, but I think I need to be alone this year, I told him. I need to figure some things out. As Thanksgiving approached, my parents carefully avoided the subject during our infrequent interactions. My mother asked about job applications. My father discussed the weather. We performed an elaborate dance around the elephant in the room, pretending that excluding their middle child from a family holiday was perfectly normal. The night before Thanksgiving, I lay awake wondering what exactly I wasn't ready for. What conversations were so important that they required my absence? What family tensions would be too much for my supposedly fragile emotional state? Little did I know, I would soon discover exactly what they were hiding from me, and it would change everything. Thanksgiving morning arrived with an unseasonable warmth that seemed to mock the coldness I felt inside. From my window in the guest house, I could see my mother loading coolers into her car, deviled eggs and cranberry sauce, no doubt, prepared days in advance as per Reynolds' tradition. My father emerged carrying a case of wine, his movements brisk and purposeful. Neither glanced toward the guest house. I pulled the curtains closed and turned away. I had decided that wallowing wasn't an option. If I couldn't be with family, I would create my own celebration, a declaration of independence rather than a consolation prize. The previous evening, I had visited the local market, selecting ingredients for a modest feast of my own. Nothing elaborate like my mother's spread of 12 sides and 3 pies, but something that would feel special nonetheless. A small turkey breast, fresh green beans, baby potatoes, and a single-serving pumpkin cheesecake. I'd even splurged on a bottle of Prosecco, not champagne, which would forever be associated with family toasts to achievements that weren't mine. By 9 o'clock, my parents had departed. The main house stood empty and silent across the garden, windows dark like closed eyes. I cranked up my favorite playlist and set to work in the guest house's compact kitchen, determined to fill the space with music, aromas, and purpose. My phone buzzed with a text from my cousin Megan, "Waiting for you to arrive." "Where are you guys?" My stomach clenched. So not everyone knew about my exclusion. I typed a vague response about not feeling well, hating the lie but unable to bear the thought of explaining the truth. More messages trickled in throughout the morning. My uncle wondering if I needed directions. My grandfather asking if I'd be there in time for the football game. Each notification felt like a tiny needle, pricking the bubble of composure I was desperately trying to maintain. I silenced my phone and focused on cooking. The simple task of chopping vegetables became meditative, each precise cut a small achievement. I remembered how cooking had always been a refuge, the one family activity where my creativity was occasionally appreciated. My grandmother had once praised my intuitive approach to seasoning, saying I had a natural palate. It was one of the few compliments about my natural abilities I could recall. As the turkey breast roasted, filling the small space with savory warmth, I found myself wandering to the bookshelf. Among my novels and photography books sat a family photo album I'd brought from New York. I hadn't opened it in years, the memories inside too complicated to casually revisit. Today, however, seemed perfect for confronting the past. I carried the album to the sofa and slowly turned its pages. There I was at 8, gap-toothed and beaming beside a science fair project that had one honorable mention. My father stood beside me, his smile tight, eyes already moving toward Harper's first-place display in the background. Another photo, 16-year-old me at the photography exhibition, holding my award certificate. I was smiling, but my eyes held a wariness, already understanding that this achievement wouldn't count in the currency of Reynolds' success. Family vacation in Martha's Vineyard. High school graduation. College acceptance day. Through each image, a pattern emerged that I'd never fully acknowledged, the subtle positioning of family members, with Harper and Ethan always centrally placed while I occupied the periphery. The way my parents' hands rested on my siblings' shoulders while I stood slightly apart. The visual evidence of my outsider status was stark and undeniable. By midday, as the tantalizing aroma of roasting turkey filled the guest house, emotions I'd been suppressing burst through my carefully constructed composure. The tears came suddenly and with such force that I doubled over on the sofa, the photo album sliding to the floor with a thud. Years of subtle rejections, dismissed achievements, and conditional love converged into a tidal wave of grief. For nearly 30 minutes, I sobbed without restraint, no longer concerned about appearing emotional or dramatic, the very qualities my family found so troubling. There was no audience for my breakdown, no one to judge or dismiss my feelings as excessive. The freedom to fully experience my pain without apology was strangely cathartic. When the timer chimed for the turkey, I wiped my eyes and rose on unsteady legs. My reflection in the kitchen window showed reddened eyes and tear-stained cheeks, a face my family never saw because I'd become so adept at hiding my hurt behind closed bathroom doors and forced smiles. As I moved through the motions of completing my solitary meal, my phone rang. Allison Parker, my best friend since college, appeared on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. "Happy Thanksgiving." Her voice was bright and warm. "How's the family circus this year?" The simple question broke the dam again. Through halting sobs, I explained my exclusion, the vague justifications, the hurt. Allison listened without interrupting, her silence supportive rather than judgmental. "That's absolutely ridiculous," she said when I finished. "Grab your turkey and come to my place. My roommates and I are doing a misfit Thanksgiving for everyone who couldn't go home. No questions, no judgment, just food and bad movies." Her invitation was tempting, the prospect of friendly faces and uncomplicated acceptance called to me like a siren song. But something held me back. "Thank you, but I think I need to be alone today," I said finally. "I need to process this." "Are you sure?" "No one should be alone on Thanksgiving." "I'm not alone," I replied, surprising myself with the response. "I'm with myself. And I think that's what I need right now." After hanging up, I retrieved a notebook from my workspace. It wasn't a formal journal, just a composition book I used for client notes and creative ideas. But today it would serve a different purpose. At the top of a blank page, I wrote, "What they don't see about me." What began as a list transformed into pages of reflection, memories, achievements, struggles, dreams, and strengths that my family had overlooked or dismissed. I wrote about my resilience in rebuilding after losing my job. The creative solutions I developed for my freelance clients. The emotional intelligence that made me a good friend and partner, even if it marked me as too sensitive in my family's eyes. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows, I cooked, ate my small feast, and continued writing. The Prosecco remained unopened. I wanted clarity today, not numbed emotions. By evening, something unexpected had occurred. Through the very act of articulating my worth outside the narrow Reynolds definition of success, I'd begun to see myself more clearly. The shame that had clung to me like a shadow since my mother's phone call was receding, replaced by something that felt surprisingly like peace. Then my phone chimed with a text message that would shatter that newfound serenity and set in motion events I could never have anticipated. It was from Ethan. "So sorry about everything. They shouldn't be discussing your inheritance without you here." My inheritance? What was my younger brother talking about? Before I could respond, another message appeared. "Shit. Ignore that. Wrong thread." But it was too late. The message couldn't be unseen, and its implications sent my mind racing in a new and troubling direction. Whatever was happening at my grandparents' Thanksgiving table suddenly had a name, and it involved my financial future. The peace I'd found through self-reflection was instantly replaced with a burning need for answers. It was time to discover what family matter was so important that it required my absence. My fingers hovered over my phone's keyboard, a mixture of shock and anger making it difficult to form a coherent response to Ethan's accidentally revealing text. After several attempts, I settled on directness. "What do you mean, discussing my inheritance? What's going on there?" Three dots appeared immediately, disappeared, then reappeared. Ethan was clearly struggling with how to respond. Finally, his message came through. "Can I call you tomorrow? Too many people around right now." "No," I typed back firmly. "Call me now. Go outside if you have to." 5 minutes passed with no response. 10. I paced the guest house, the remnants of my solitary Thanksgiving meal forgotten on the table. Just as I was about to text again, my phone rang. Ethan's name flashed on the screen. I messed up, he said immediately, his voice hushed. The background noise suggested he'd found a quiet corner away from the family gathering. I'm in Grandpa's study. I only have a few minutes before they notice I'm gone. What's happening, Ethan? What inheritance are they discussing without me? A heavy sigh came through the line. Grandma and Grandpa are revising their will. They're meeting with their estate attorney next week, and Dad wanted everyone to discuss it beforehand. My heart pounded painfully against my ribs. And this concerns me how, exactly? There. He hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. They're considering putting your portion in a trust instead of giving you direct control like Harper and me. Dad says it's to protect you, but it's really because they think you can't handle money after losing your job and moving back home. The betrayal was so profound that for a moment, I couldn't speak. When my voice returned, it was barely audible. They're using my layoff against me? A company-wide layoff that had nothing to do with my performance? It's not just that, Ethan continued, his words coming faster now, as if he needed to get everything out before losing his nerve. Dad's been talking about your pattern of instability and poor life choices. He brought up you changing majors sophomore year, that apartment you rented in that questionable Brooklyn neighborhood, even your freelance work instead of finding a real job. He's making it sound like you're one step away from financial ruin. And everyone's just nodding along with this? The pain in my chest was physical now, a crushing weight that made it difficult to breathe. Aunt Vivian tried to defend you, but Dad shut her down. Uncle Robert is backing Dad, of course. Harper's been mostly quiet. And Grandma and Grandpa, they seem worried, like they really believe you need to be protected from yourself. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I gripped the kitchen counter to steady myself. So this is why I wasn't ready to join Thanksgiving? Because they wanted to discuss treating me like a financially incompetent child without me there to defend myself? Essentially, yeah. Ethan's voice dropped even lower. Mom said having you there would just make it emotional and unproductive. That you might overreact. Of course. Heaven forbid a Reynolds display actual human emotion about being betrayed by their own family. That would be so inconvenient for everyone. I have to go, Ethan said suddenly. Grandma's looking for me. I'm sorry, Mackenzie. This whole thing is messed up. After hanging up, I stood motionless in the middle of the guest house, trying to process this new information. The exclusion wasn't about protecting me at all, it was about protecting them from having to face me while they dismantled my financial future. The sheer cowardice of it was staggering. Without consciously deciding to do so, I found myself dialing my grandmother's number. It rang 4 times before she answered, the familiar sounds of family conversation in the background. Mackenzie? Is everything all right, dear? Her voice carried the slight tremor of recent years, but her concern sounded genuine. Is it true you and Grandpa are changing your will to put my inheritance in a trust because you think I'm financially irresponsible? A sharp intake of breath, then silence. In the background, I could hear the sudden hush of conversation, the unmistakable sound of my question being overheard. Who told you that? My grandmother finally asked, her voice strained. Does it matter? Is it true? Another pause. This isn't a conversation for Thanksgiving, Mackenzie. We can discuss this another time. You're already discussing it right now, just without me present. My voice remained steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. I want to know if it's true. Your father has expressed some concerns about your current situation. We're simply exploring options that would be in everyone's best interest. Everyone's best interest, or his? Did anyone bother to actually look at my financial history before deciding I'm incompetent? Did anyone consider that losing a job due to company layoffs isn't a character flaw? I heard muffled sounds, then my father's voice came on the line. Mackenzie, this is inappropriate. We'll discuss this when emotions aren't running high. When would that be, Dad? When exactly would be a convenient time to discuss how you're convincing my grandparents I'm too irresponsible to manage my own inheritance? Perhaps never, since you didn't even want me to know this conversation was happening. You're proving my point with this emotional outburst, he said coldly. This is precisely why we thought it best you weren't here today. God forbid someone express actual feelings in this family, I shot back. Heaven forbid we acknowledge that what you're doing is hurtful and wrong. We're trying to protect you. No, you're trying to control me. There's a difference. I could hear my mother in the background, saying something about calming down. My father's exasperated sigh came through clearly. We'll talk about this later, Mackenzie. Enjoy your Thanksgiving. The call ended abruptly. I stared at my phone in disbelief, anger building like a physical force within me. My first impulse was to drive straight to my grandparents' house and confront the entire family, to force them to say these things to my face rather than behind my back. But as I grabbed my car keys, a moment of clarity broke through the rage. Wasn't that exactly what they expected? The emotional, impulsive Mackenzie, proving through her very actions that she couldn't be trusted to make rational decisions? No. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Instead, I opened my laptop and logged into my bank accounts. I pulled up my credit report, my investment statements from the modest portfolio I'd started building in my New York days, and my tax returns for the past 5 years. I created a spreadsheet tracking my expenses and income, noting the consistency with which I'd contributed to my emergency fund and retirement account, even on a nonprofit marketing salary. The numbers told a different story than the one my father was spinning. They showed prudent financial management despite modest means. They revealed a young woman who had never missed a rent payment, even in one of the most expensive cities in the country. Who had never accumulated credit card debt. Who had saved diligently, if not lavishly. As the night deepened, my anger transformed into something more focused and productive. If my family wanted to have a conversation about my financial competence, we would have one, but it would be based on facts, not perceptions. And it wouldn't happen on their terms, with me excluded and defenseless. It was time to prepare for a confrontation that had been brewing for 26 years. The morning after Thanksgiving dawned gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. I'd slept fitfully, my dreams populated by family members whispering behind closed doors. I awoke with my jaw tight from clenching my teeth all night, the anger from yesterday still thrumming beneath my skin. My first instinct remained to storm into my parents' house and demand explanations. The fantasy was seductive, the shocked expressions as I threw their betrayal back in their faces, the stammered justifications they'd attempt, the righteous fury I'd unleash after years of swallowing my feelings to maintain peace. But as I sat at the kitchen table, coffee mug warming my hands, clarity began to emerge through the fog of hurt. Hadn't emotional reactions always been used as evidence against me? Hadn't every tear been labeled as oversensitive, every raised voice as dramatic? My entire family was expecting, perhaps even hoping for, exactly this response. It would only reinforce the narrative they'd constructed, Mackenzie, the unstable one. The one who needs managing. The one who can't handle adult responsibilities. No. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. I needed to approach this strategically, not emotionally. And I needed perspective from someone who understood family dynamics like mine. I texted James, "Can you meet today?" Family drama exploded. "Need your advice." His response was immediate, "I'll be there in an hour." Bringing coffee and bagels. James Mitchell had grown up with similarly high-achieving parents, his father a surgeon, his mother a federal judge. The difference was that his parents had eventually recognized the toxic pressure they'd created and worked to rebuild their relationship with their children. His insight would be valuable. While waiting for his arrival, I began sorting through my financial records more methodically than I had the night before. Bank statements, investment accounts, credit reports, tax returns, I organized them chronologically, highlighting key figures and patterns. The evidence of my financial responsibility was clear and undeniable. Despite a modest income, I had maintained an excellent credit score, saved consistently, and avoided debt. Even the move back home had been a strategic decision to rebuild savings, not a financial necessity. The knock at the door came precisely on time. James was nothing if not punctual. He stood on the threshold with a paper bag from my favorite bakery and 2 large coffees, his expression a mixture of concern and determination. "Okay," he said, setting the food on the counter. "What happened?" I explained everything: the exclusion from Thanksgiving, Ethan's accidental revelation, the phone call with my grandmother and father. As I spoke, James's expression darkened, but he listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes on his phone. "So they're trying to control your inheritance because they think you're financially irresponsible," he summarized when I finished. "Based on what evidence, exactly?" "That's just it, there is no evidence. I've never been in financial trouble. I've never asked them for money. The company layoff was completely beyond my control, and moving home was a practical decision to save money while rebuilding my client base." "Which shows financial prudence, not irresponsibility," James pointed out. "Have you shown them your actual financial records?" "They've never asked to see them. They just assume." He gestured to my laptop, where my financial spreadsheets were displayed. "This is excellent, by the way. Very thorough. I spent half the night compiling it." James paced the small living room, thinking aloud as he often did when working through a problem. "So your first instinct was to confront them emotionally, which would have played right into their hands." He nodded approvingly. "But you recognized that trap." "Good. Very good. I'm tired of being dismissed because I express emotions," I said quietly. "My feelings about this situation are valid, but I need to present them in a way that can't be weaponized against me." James stopped pacing and sat beside me on the sofa. "This reminds me of when my parents were convinced I was making a mistake leaving corporate law for graphic design. They had created this narrative in their heads that I was throwing away my future, despite all evidence to the contrary." "How did you handle it?" "I showed up at their house with my business plan, client list, projected earnings, and portfolio. I presented it like a business proposal, no emotions, just facts. It was the only language they respected." I nodded slowly, an idea taking shape. "Facts, not feelings." "At least not at first." "Exactly. Once they accept the factual reality, then you can introduce the emotional component, how their actions have made you feel. But lead with what they can't dismiss." For the next several hours, James and I refined my financial presentation, organizing the information for maximum impact. But as we worked, I found myself increasingly distracted by a deeper question. "Why do I even care what they think of me?" I asked suddenly, interrupting our discussion of how to present my freelance income. "Why am I working this hard to prove myself to people who have never seen me clearly?" James set down his coffee cup. "That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Maybe I should just walk away. Let them put whatever restrictions they want on whatever money they want to give me. Is an inheritance worth this kind of emotional toll?" "Only you can answer that," he said gently. "But I don't think this is really about the money, is it?" He was right, of course. It wasn't about the inheritance itself, it was about what it represented. It was about being seen as an equal, a competent adult worthy of the same respect given to my siblings. It was about challenging a family narrative that had defined me since childhood. "I need to do this for me," I realized aloud. "Even if nothing changes with the will, I need to stand up for myself. I need them to hear me, really hear me, maybe for the first time." As evening approached, James had to leave for a prior commitment, but his parting words stayed with me. "Remember, this isn't just about proving them wrong. It's about reclaiming your narrative. Whatever happens, you know the truth about yourself." After he left, I sat alone in the quiet guest house, truly reflecting on my life choices for perhaps the first time without the distorting lens of my family's expectations. Had I really made poor decisions, or simply different ones than a Reynolds was expected to make? I thought about my communications degree, which my family had viewed as less prestigious than Harper's medical path or Ethan's law degree. But that education had given me valuable skills in a digital economy, allowing me to pivot to freelance work when necessary. Was that really a failure? My Brooklyn apartment in what my father called a questionable neighborhood had been a vibrant, artistic community where I'd found friends who accepted me completely. The neighborhood might not have impressed my parents' country club friends, but it had nourished my soul in ways Westlake never could. Even my supposed career setback, losing my job at the marketing firm, had ultimately pushed me to develop my own client base, potentially leading to greater independence and fulfillment than my previous position. As I reviewed these choices and their outcomes, a startling realization dawned: by most measures other than my family's narrow definition of success, I had actually made remarkably sound decisions. I had prioritized personal growth, creative fulfillment, and authentic relationships over status and financial maximization, but those choices reflected values, not irresponsibility. I opened a new document and began typing a different kind of presentation, not just of my financial history, but of my life achievements and choices. For each decision my family had questioned or criticized, I articulated the reasoning, values, and positive outcomes that had resulted. The picture that emerged was not of an unstable, emotionally reactive person, but of a young woman charting her own course with purpose and integrity. By midnight, my plan had evolved beyond a simple financial defense. I would show my family who I truly was, not who they had decided I was. And I would do it on my terms, not theirs. I finally knew exactly what I needed to do. The day after Thanksgiving, Black Friday to most of America, was traditionally when my grandparents hosted a more intimate dinner using the previous day's leftovers. Only immediate family attended this gathering, making it the perfect setting for what I was about to do. I spent the morning finalizing my presentation, organizing my documents, and rehearsing what I would say. James called to check in, offering encouragement and last-minute advice. "Remember," he said before hanging up, "no matter how they react, you know your truth." At precisely 6:30 p.m., when I knew everyone would be lingering over dessert and coffee, I pulled into my grandparents' driveway. My pulse raced as I collected my portfolio and laptop, but my resolve remained firm. For once in my life, I wasn't arriving at a family function seeking approval or validation. I was arriving to speak my truth, regardless of how it was received. Through the dining room windows, I could see them all gathered around the table: my parents, Harper, Ethan, and my grandparents. They looked so normal, so comfortable in their shared reality. A reality that had never fully included me. I didn't ring the doorbell. Using my key, I let myself in quietly and walked to the dining room entrance. For several seconds, I stood unnoticed, watching them laugh at something my father had said. It was Ethan who saw me first, his fork freezing halfway to his mouth. "Mackenzie," he said, and 5 heads turned simultaneously in my direction. The expressions ranged from shock, my mother, to discomfort, my father, to what appeared to be genuine pleasure, my grandmother. "Sorry to interrupt dessert," I said calmly, stepping into the room. "But I think we have some unfinished business to discuss." "Mackenzie, this isn't appropriate," my father began, but my grandmother raised her hand, silencing him. "Let her speak, Thomas," she said firmly. "She has every right to be here." I set my portfolio on the sideboard and opened my laptop. "Yesterday, I discovered you were all discussing my inheritance and whether I'm financially responsible enough to manage it. Since I wasn't invited to participate in that conversation, I thought I'd bring the relevant information to you." I connected my laptop to the dining room television, a feature my tech enthusiast grandfather had insisted on installing for watching football during holiday meals. My carefully prepared presentation appeared on the screen, beginning with a 5-year overview of my financial history. As you can see, I've maintained an excellent credit score of 782 despite working in the nonprofit sector with a modest salary. I've never carried credit card debt, and I've consistently contributed to both an emergency fund and retirement account. I advanced to the next slide, aware of the stunned silence around the table. This chart shows my spending patterns compared to my income. Note the consistent pattern of living below my means, even in New York City. For 15 minutes, I walked them through my financial history with the precision and detachment of a corporate presentation. I presented facts, figures, and documentation that thoroughly disproved any notion of financial irresponsibility. No one interrupted, though I could see my father shifting uncomfortably in his chair. When I finished the financial portion, I took a deep breath and switched to a different kind of slide, a photograph of me at my college graduation. Now I'd like to address some other perceptions that seem to be influencing your decision about my inheritance. This decision isn't really about money, is it? It's about who you think I am. I advanced through a series of slides showing my life choices that had been questioned or criticized, my degree, my career path, my Brooklyn apartment, my freelance work. For each, I calmly explained the thoughtful reasoning behind these decisions, the values they reflected, and the positive outcomes they had produced. My communications degree may not have the prestige of medical school, but it gave me versatile skills in a rapidly evolving digital economy. My apartment in Brooklyn may not have been in a neighborhood you'd choose, but it provided an affordable community of creative, supportive friends who accepted me completely. My freelance work may not offer the security you value, but it allows me to use my skills to help organizations doing meaningful work while maintaining the flexibility to build something that truly reflects my values. I looked directly at my father. These aren't failures or poor choices. They're different choices, choices that reflect who I am, not who you wanted me to be. The room remained utterly silent. My mother stared at her lap. Harper looked thoughtful, while Ethan wore a slight smile of what appeared to be pride. My grandfather's expression was unreadable, but my grandmother's eyes glistened with what might have been tears. I'm not here to demand inclusion in your will, I continued, my voice steady despite the emotion building in my chest. If you genuinely believe I'm not capable of managing an inheritance, that's your prerogative. But I am asking you to base that decision on facts, not on a narrative about me that was created years ago and never questioned. I closed my laptop and looked around the table. For my entire life, I've been judged by standards that never fit who I truly am. I've been labeled emotional when I'm passionate, unstable when I'm adaptable, and irresponsible when I'm simply following a different path. I've been excluded from conversations about my own life and future. And yesterday, I was deemed not ready to sit at this table while my financial competence was questioned behind my back. My voice finally cracked slightly. That stops today. I deserve better from the people who claim to love me. The silence that followed felt eternal. Finally, to everyone's surprise, it was my grandfather who spoke. She's right. His voice, still commanding despite his age, cut through the tension. We haven't been fair to you, Mackenzie. I hadn't realized how much we'd. He paused, searching for words, how much we'd decided who you were without ever really seeing you. My grandmother reached for my hand. Your presentation was very thorough, dear. But it shouldn't have been necessary. We should have asked, not assumed. My father cleared his throat. Mackenzie, he stopped, uncharacteristically at a loss for words. This is a lot to process. Take all the time you need, I replied, surprising myself with the genuine lack of urgency I felt. Having spoken my truth, I suddenly realized I didn't need their immediate acceptance or approval. That wasn't why I'd come. Unexpectedly, it was my Aunt Vivian who spoke next. I hadn't even noticed her sitting in the corner armchair, having apparently arrived while I was speaking. Bravo, Mackenzie, she said, standing and walking to my side. I've been telling them for years they weren't seeing you clearly. Perhaps now they'll listen. One by one, family members began to respond. Harper admitted she'd never considered my different career path as valid rather than lesser. Ethan apologized for not defending me more vigorously. My mother, in a rare moment of vulnerability, confessed that her own fear of financial insecurity had colored her perception of my choices. My father remained largely silent, occasionally nodding but offering little verbal acknowledgement. I recognized this as his way of processing information that contradicted his firmly held beliefs. It wasn't the heartfelt apology part of me had hoped for, but it was something, an opening, perhaps, for future conversations. As the evening progressed, the discussion evolved from my specific situation to broader questions about family dynamics, communication patterns, and how different forms of success and fulfillment might be recognized. For perhaps the first time, I felt truly heard by my family, not completely understood, perhaps, but at least acknowledged as having a valid perspective. When I finally left my grandparents' house hours later, nothing had been definitively resolved regarding the inheritance. No promises had been made, no decisions reversed. But something fundamental had shifted in how they saw me, and more importantly, in how I saw myself in relation to them. I drove back to the guest house feeling lighter than I had in years. Whether or not they changed their minds about the inheritance seemed suddenly less important than the fact that I had finally found my voice. The weeks following my unexpected appearance at the family dinner unfolded in ways I couldn't have predicted. Rather than the awkward silence I'd half expected, each family member approached me individually, seemingly eager to establish a new kind of connection. My mother was the first, arriving at the guest house the very next morning with a basket of muffins and an uncharacteristic hesitancy in her manner. We sat on the small porch, steam rising from our coffee cups in the crisp late autumn air. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, her voice softer than usual. "About how we decided who you were without seeing you clearly." I waited, giving her space to continue. "I realized something last night," she said, looking down at her hands. "I've been projecting my own fears onto you for years. My parents struggled financially, you know. Before I met your father, before medical school, we were always one emergency away from disaster. This was news to me. My mother rarely spoke about her childhood, and certainly never about financial insecurity. When you chose a less conventional path, all those old fears surfaced. I wasn't seeing you, I was seeing my own worst anxieties." Her eyes, when they finally met mine, were brimming with tears. "I'm sorry, Mackenzie. I've been unfair to you." The apology, so long awaited, washed over me like a warm wave. Not because it instantly healed the hurt, but because it acknowledged it was real. "Thank you for telling me," I said simply. "It helps to understand." Similar conversations followed over the coming days. Harper called to suggest lunch, where she admitted to feeling relieved that I'd found a different path. "I've been miserable in cardiology," she confessed over salads at our old high school hangout. "I only chose it because it was prestigious and challenging. I never stopped to ask if it was right for me." Ethan, true to his more direct nature, texted a simple message: "You're badass." Always knew it. Everyone else finally catching up. Coming from my little brother, this constituted high praise. My grandfather invited me to his study one afternoon, ostensibly to help him with his new tablet, but really to have a conversation he seemed to have been rehearsing. "I built my business from nothing," he told me, seated in his worn leather chair. "Everyone said it couldn't be done, that I was taking too many risks. But I believed in my vision." He fixed me with his clear blue eyes. "You remind me of myself at your age, Mackenzie. I just didn't see it until now." My father proved the most difficult to reach. He remained distant for nearly 2 weeks, responding to my texts with brief, non-committal replies. Then one evening, he appeared at the guest house door, asking if I'd join him for a walk. We strolled through the neighborhood in the gathering dusk, our breath visible in the cold air. For several minutes, he said nothing, hands thrust deep in his coat pockets. "I've always believed my job was to protect this family," he finally said. "To ensure everyone's security and success. It's how my father defined his role, and his father before him." I nodded, recognizing the weight of generational expectations. "When you chose a different path, I saw it as a rejection of everything I valued, everything I'd worked to provide." He stopped walking, turning to face me. "It's taken me this long to realize that perhaps the problem wasn't your choices, but my definition of success." It wasn't exactly an apology, but from my father, this level of self-reflection was unprecedented. "I never rejected your values, Dad," I said carefully. "I just needed to find my own." "I know that now," he replied, and we continued walking, the silence between us more comfortable than it had been in years. The most surprising development came just before Christmas, when my grandparents invited me to join them for tea. With formal politeness that hinted at serious matters to be discussed, they informed me that they had met with their estate attorney. "We've revised our will," my grandmother explained, pouring Earl Grey from her cherished silver service. "All grandchildren will be treated equally, with no special restrictions." "That's not necessary," I began, but my grandfather held up his hand. "It is absolutely necessary," he said firmly. "Not because of your presentation, though that was impressively thorough, but because we realized we were perpetuating a harmful pattern of conditional love and approval in this family. That stops with our generation." I understood then that the inheritance had never been the real issue. It was merely a symbol of something much deeper, the conditional acceptance that had shaped our family dynamics for generations. By challenging this pattern, I had unknowingly created an opening for change that extended far beyond my own situation. As Christmas approached, I found myself developing a new relationship with James. The crisis had brought us closer, his unwavering support during my confrontation revealing a depth of understanding and connection I hadn't fully appreciated before. Our casual friendship evolved into something deeper, built on mutual respect and genuine acceptance. "You know what's funny?" he said one evening as we decorated the small Christmas tree I'd set up in the guest house. "When most people face a family crisis, it tears them apart. Somehow you've managed to turn it into something healing. Not just for me," I realized aloud. "I think everyone needed this conversation, they just didn't know how to start it." The upcoming holiday gathering, the first since my confrontation, approached with a mixture of anticipation and lingering anxiety. Would the individual breakthroughs translate to changed dynamics when we were all together? Or would old patterns reassert themselves under the pressure of tradition? I decided to approach it differently this year. Rather than arriving with defenses raised, anticipating judgment, I would come as myself, neither seeking approval nor rejecting connection. It was a delicate balance, but one I was finally ready to attempt. Christmas Eve at my grandparents' house began with the familiar rituals, the formal dinner, the carefully wrapped gifts, the Reynolds family punch recipe that no one actually enjoyed but everyone dutifully sipped. But beneath these traditions, subtle shifts were evident. My mother asked about my freelance projects with genuine interest rather than thinly veiled concern. My father engaged James in a lengthy conversation about design principles without a single reference to the financial stability of his career choice. When Harper announced she was considering a switch from cardiology to family practice, a less prestigious but potentially more fulfilling specialty, she glanced at me with a small smile of acknowledgement. Most telling was the moment when my grandmother asked me to help her arrange the dessert table, a task traditionally reserved for Harper. "You have such a good eye for these things," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. A small gesture, perhaps, but in the language of family dynamics, a significant one. As we gathered around the piano for the annual carol singing, I caught my reflection in the ornament-festooned mirror above the fireplace. I looked different somehow, more settled in my own skin, less poised for judgment or rejection. The change wasn't in how my family saw me, though that had certainly shifted. The real transformation was in how I saw myself. I had discovered that staying home that Thanksgiving, initially an act of exclusion, had become the catalyst for finding my voice, for demanding to be seen as I truly was rather than as I had been defined. The painful rejection had forced me to articulate my own value, first to myself and then to others, in a way I might never have done otherwise. The boundaries I was learning to establish weren't walls to keep my family at a distance, but rather clear definitions of who I was and what I needed from our relationships. Some days were still challenging, old patterns emerging in subtle ways that required gentle correction. But the foundation had shifted, creating space for new ways of connecting. As the new year approached, I made a decision that surprised even me. I would stay in Westlake a bit longer, not out of financial necessity, but to continue strengthening these newly evolved relationships while maintaining my freelance business. The guest house, once a symbol of my failure and dependence, was now simply a place from which I was choosing to operate for a time. The difference was subtle but profound. James supported this decision, understanding that it came from strength rather than fear. Just don't get too comfortable in Connecticut, he teased. Brooklyn misses you. On New Year's Eve, as we gathered at my parents' house to welcome the coming year, my grandfather raised a champagne glass for the traditional toast. To the Reynolds family, he began, as he had for decades. But then he continued with words I'd never heard before: may we continue to grow, to listen, and to see each other clearly in the year ahead. Our glasses clinked in the warm light, the sound like a promise. Later that evening, as James and I walked back to the guest house under a canopy of winter stars, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought me here. If someone had told me on Thanksgiving that being excluded from the family dinner would lead to all of this, I never would have believed them. Sometimes rejection is just redirection, James said, squeezing my hand. You were redirected back to yourself. That was it exactly. By staying home that Thanksgiving, I had finally found my way home to myself, the self I had always been beneath the labels and expectations, the self that had been waiting patiently to be recognized and embraced. And that was a homecoming worth celebrating. Have you ever had to stand up to your family to be seen for who you truly are? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this journey of finding your voice resonated with you. And remember, sometimes the moments that feel like rejection are actually doorways to your most authentic self. Thank you for being part of this journey, and I wish you the courage to speak your truth, even when your voice shakes.